You're listening to Nurture Your Zest. I'm your host, Ashleigh King, and I will introduce you to a wealth of interesting, fascinating individuals from all walks of life who will share their stories, how they've overcome challenges, and you will find out their top tips for success. Through this podcast, you can gain tips to grow and change your life and the way you see the world, and help you to nurture your zest. Hello everyone, today I'm joined by Simon. Thank you so much for joining us today, Simon.
Absolutely my pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Brilliant. I'm also looking forward to it because we are both very chatty, so this should be a fun chat. And speaking of chatting, we also both love to do stuff around helping people to gain their confidence and their visibility and things like this. And you mainly do that through teaching presentation skills. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what I'm known for, and all the things that go with that, such as confidence training and that kind of thing. Yes.
Brilliant. So, what kind of customers do you serve?
The ideal customer is a grown-up in a professional service industry. Most of them are people who have been newly promoted. So they will be technically very, very good at what they do. You know, they may be the world's best accountant, then they've been promoted, and now they have to manage accountants. And that's a completely different kettle of fish. Talking about accountancy is different from doing it. Or it could be computer code programmers, or it could be legal, or it could be surveyors. You name it. It's the point is that people are technically good at what they do, but now have to talk about it.
That's a really interesting one, because that's not just presenting as in presentations about where you're at with stats and figures and trying to raise investment or whatever it might be. It's actually also in influencing people, I guess, and in helping them to manage their teams well and all of that non-verbal communications as well.
Yep. Most presentations are actually given in-house. You're just doing a monthly report to the board or something. So the idea we have about presentations being something that you do at a conference, yes, it happens, but actually that's a tiny, tiny percentage of the real thing that goes on.
Great. So can you tell us what are the common problems that you find with presenters? Do you ever watch something and actually get so itchy and think, oh my gosh, what are they doing?
We have what we call the sniper slide, which is my team's term for how far through the presentation does Simon get before he wishes he had a sniper rifle to reduce the number of slides. There are a number of things I see. The first is people thinking of presentations defensively. So they kind of go into a negative mindset and they kind of want to avoid the presentation being a disaster. And that's the equivalent of a football team having 11 men on the goal line. You're never going to win the match. You still might lose it. The best you can hope for is a draw. Whereas the best way of making a presentation is to change the mindset completely. And instead of thinking, what could go wrong and how can I avoid it? It is to ask yourself, what do I want out of this presentation? What's the best option? And how can I get it? It sounds like mumbo jumbo, but it changes the whole way you design the presentation. It changes what you do completely. And it means that the presentation takes a few risks, maybe. Sometimes it doesn't work, maybe. But more often than not, it scores what it's trying to do. Whereas the defensive posture, by definition, can't do anything than just get you from A to B without falling over the furniture. The other things I see people doing a lot is not rehearsing enough, so they don't know what they're talking about. The slide comes up and they go, oh yeah, and then they talk about it. And there's a shed load of research that says that your perceived competence in your whatever it is you're doing carries over from the perceived confidence in how well you deliver it. So if people think you are delivering it well, for good or for ill, they will think that you know what you're talking about. Now that logically doesn't follow, but that's what people's subconscious brains work on. So no matter how good you are, if you suck at a presentation, people are statistically less likely to trust what you're saying. On the other hand, if you take risks, if you practice a presentation, if you deliver it right, you can get away with not being quite so good at the content. I don't recommend that because that's cheating. That's cheating. But you can get away with a little bit more.
It's a really interesting, juxtaposition. It's two different views, isn't it? Or two different ways of approaching things. I see this a lot. We do a lot of group work in our MBA, and you actually came and taught us, which was wonderful.
I did, yeah. Good group.
Yeah.
Nice people. Yeah.
Thank you. They are great. And actually, there'll be a new show soon called MBA with Ash, where all 29 of them are going to come on the show.
Wow.
So one at a time.
I was going to say the studio is not going to take 29 people.
Exactly. Yeah, it's great, but it's not big enough for that. But one of the things we find is actually that tension. When you've got lots of assignments, it's sometimes difficult to learn everything you need to do for your presentations. Yeah. And we've seen this a bit sometimes in that, you know, sometimes someone kind of worked really, really hard on something, but they maybe have over-prepared, and then they've spoken for maybe 45 minutes when we were supposed to speak for 20, or similar things like this, and that can be challenging.
I need to scream at this point. If it takes 45 minutes when they should have been speaking for 20, that does not mean they have over-prepared. That means they have under-prepared because they've not realised that a 45-minute presentation can't fit into 20. They might have got overly much content, but they haven't over-prepared. Those things are very different.
I think you were really right there, actually. It's over-researched is the word I should have used.
Yep.
And actually, that's a good point, because it happened to me. I remember for a job interview I really wanted, and I rehearsed and I did so much research, but actually on the day I was so nervous and I was shaking the whole time that actually my presentation that I had practiced went on far too long, and it was really awkward. I knew I'd messed it up at that point. So I think being able to say what you need to succinctly and, you know, in a way that people can understand is really important.
Yeah. The more clearly you can explain it, the smarter people think you are, the more they believe what you say, the more likely they are to act upon it. And there's more research papers on this than I can shake a stick at.
It's great to know as well the research behind it. I think that's really important, and that's something you really did teach when you came and spoke to us. You know, you spoke about the research as well. It wasn't just, you know, hey, it's great to speak. It was also some of the theory behind it, which is helpful. I would like to know, since there are lots of speakers around, people style themselves as a speaker or on LinkedIn or wherever you might see it. And then at the same time, you get invited to speak sometimes if you've got a big network or different things. But I wonder, what I see a lot in the Northeast, and I'm wondering if this is unique to the Northeast, but it seems like there's so much collaboration in the speaker community in the Northeast. Perhaps that's just my perception from the outside, but I see so many people working together and cross-collaborating.
You're absolutely right. I mean, literally this afternoon, yesterday I passed some work to a fellow speaker and somebody who's been on your podcast before, Duncan Yellowlees. And literally this afternoon, I got an email from somebody saying, Duncan has recommended you. It's much easier to collaborate and cooperate because we all have different specialities. We're all good at particular things. And for the sake of the industry and our own credibility, you don't want to go on stage in front of an audience that is not the best audience for you, because you'll just look like a pillock.
It's like what you said earlier, actually. It's about knowing who you serve and who you can best reach. So what you were saying about, you know who your ideal customer is. It doesn't mean you won't speak to other groups, but actually knowing who you serve best is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Because those are the people who, for me, that's where I can do most good for most people most quickly.
Absolutely. And I think that's really important. I'd like to ask as well, you have a history of being in acting, right?
Yeah.
So is that how you first found your passion for speaking?
Nope. It helped once I had found my passion, but the passion for speaking came out of being a researcher. I spent 24 years as a research scientist. And towards the end of that period, I began to realise that I was being asked the same questions over and over. And what finally kind of dropped in my head is that, in my field at least, while it is true we do need more research, what we also need is for people to be able to apply the research that we have done. And they can't apply that research if they don't understand it. And they can't understand it if research scientists don't explain it. So I moved gradually from doing research to researching why people didn't apply research, to researching how to communicate the research, to teaching how to communicate the research. It's not as big a jump as it sounds when you put it step by step like that.
Well, it sounds like a really useful thing that you're doing, or that process anyway, because how often do many people speak in industry jargon or in ways that it's really hard to connect with or understand? And I think sometimes big organizations can be guilty of this, where they speak in very corporate speak, and it's really difficult for someone to get it quickly. And a lot of the time the message can then get lost.
Yeah. So there's something called cognitive load, which is basically how hard your audience has to think. And the more easy you can make the message, the more of their cognitive load is spent on learning the message. If you are using jargon, by analogy, it's a bit like speaking a foreign language, because they have to translate the jargon into English, and then they start to understand it rather than just listen to it straight away. So if I dropped into Spanish, I won't, because my Spanish is awful, but if I dropped into Spanish now and you could speak Spanish, you would still have to do that halfway translation thing before you could concentrate on the content. Jargon is exactly the same. Dialect words are exactly the same. Accent is exactly the same. Anything that makes it harder for your audience to understand isn't just a discourtesy to your audience. It's actually a discourtesy to your message, because it means your audience are less likely to get what it is that you are saying.
Okay, so I have a question relating to that. So sometimes I guess jargon is useful. So if you were in the House of Parliament, or if you were speaking to a particular type of academic discipline at a huge research conference, in those settings, is jargon and academic language that's maybe more verbose, more, over the top.
Okay, let me stop you there, because jargon is designed to be unverbose.
Okay.
It's a contraction.
Right, okay.
It's a shorthand. There are two times when jargon is a good idea. The first is if everybody in the audience is on board with that jargon, so it saves time. And the second is if you want to prove that you are an insider. So, case in point, my first degree is in geography. My PhD was half funded in the Department of Geography and the medical school. I was looking for geographical patterns of acute lymphoblastic leukemia in children. Now, no medical doctor ever says acute lymphoblastic leukemia, because it's just too long and it's too much of a mouthful. They all refer to it as ALL. So if I wanted to go to the medical school and make it sound like I knew what I was talking about and I knew what I was an insider, I had to say, hello, my name's Simon, I'm doing the ALL research from, rather than, hello, I'm Simon, I'm doing the acute lymphoblastic leukemia research from, because that would have just labelled me as an outsider. So there are only those two occasions when it's a good idea.
I like that. It's really interesting to know that. And actually, on another side, with doctors, they're very busy people. So actually shortening it shows them that you're saving them time. You're making that step to be as efficient with your words as possible.
My elder daughter and her partner are both doctors, so I've got that one coming at me out of the ears.
I'm sure. Great. Okay, so how can someone start to learn how to speak well?
Oh, gosh. How long is a piece of string? Now, the first mistake that everybody always makes is when they want to start making presentations, they start making presentations to their friends. And that's absolutely the wrong thing to do, because if you screw up in front of your friends, the consequences are quite significant, because you have to see those people forever and ever and ever and ever. A better way to practice is to get your presentation sorted and then go and do it deliberately to people who are not going to be interested, who are not going to care, who are not going to buy from you, who are not going to see you, whatever it is. But the idea is to get away from the people whom you want to speak to. So, silly personal example, I've spoken all over the world, I've spoken professionally, and that's fine, but the hardest, stressiest gig I've done in a long time was in Newcastle just before Christmas 2019. I was closing a conference called Atomic X. Now, I knew, either directly or indirectly, everybody in the audience. And had I screwed up, I was going to have to look those people in the eye for the next 18 months and go, yeah, I was the professional speaker who bombed on the speaking thing. Yeah. And that's a big ask. That's a big thing. But going to Singapore, for example, if you go to Singapore and do a gig, you're never going to see those people again. So rule one, get out of where it is that you think you are safe, because that's by definition the people who are going to be the hardest long-term audience. The other thing to do is to remember to start small, because most of us have got this big idea that we're going to do big presentations and so on. The easiest thing to do is just start by asking a question at somebody else's presentation. It's just such an easy, obvious thing to say. Start with a question at somebody else's presentation, and then maybe make a presentation that's only, now I'm going to say this with my tongue in my cheek, that's only 2 minutes long, to somebody for whom it doesn't matter. And the reason I have my tongue in my cheek is because a presentation of only 2 minutes is actually really difficult to do. It's a lot harder than, to do a 20-minute presentation, because you have to really kind of knuckle things down a bit. But if you bomb in a 2-minute presentation, it doesn't matter. You can always do it again. You can always go over. But there's nothing better than stage time. So you get up there, you do the gig, and you get counsel. Now, I'm going to differentiate here between counsel and feedback. Feedback is what your mates give you. Feedback is what the audience give you. Feedback is what your peers give you. Counsel is what experienced professionals give you. In the same way as you take legal counsel from a fully qualified lawyer, you can also get legal feedback from your mate down the pub. Which of those two is worth more? Yeah. So you do the gig, and then you get feedback from somebody whose opinion is worthwhile. Then you rehearse the changes, and then you do it again. But it's really important to remember that the old adage of practice makes perfect is, I nearly swore. Practice makes perfect is rubbish. What practice makes is permanent. So the idea is that you try it in little bits, you do it, you find out if it works, and then you practice it to cement it in. You don't do the cementing in and get it what you think is right and then take it on the floor, because if you've got it wrong at that point, you can't change it. So you take it to audiences where it doesn't matter in its half-formed state, and you learn from those audiences, and you learn from the people who know what they're talking about, and you gradually evolve the presentation rather than sit down and start writing the damn thing. That's the number of people who do that just drive me around the bend.
Well, that's it, isn't it? It's sometimes we all approach these things differently, but sometimes when I look at different processes of how people approach writing a presentation or doing it, there can sometimes be so much overthinking into it instead of... Actually, on this note, I'm president of TEDx Newcastle University, so we get a lot of applicants to do TED Talks, and I love TEDx, it's great. But one of the things is there's quite a lot of rules with TEDx about what you can and can't do and how talks should be constructed. And I actually really like that because it helps you to help people to define their own talk. And one of the things that always amazes me is, and it's something I've learned from TEDx and I now do myself, is what is the gift to the audience? What are they going to take away? What will they be left with? And I think this is something I've started to look and spot when I go to networking events now, or if I'm listening to a panel, if it's all about the speaker.
Okay, so we call that the Twitter test.
The Twitter test.
The Twitter test.
Okay.
If your entire presentation was stripped away and all you had were 200 characters for a tweet, what's the thing that you give the audience? What is it that they need to know? And if you know that, once you've got that in your head, you can start designing the presentation around that, because the rest of your presentation should be designed to give that to the audience in the way that they can accept it best. It's pretty damn simple when you put it in those terms. What most speakers start to do is they start to justify themselves, and they go, "Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Dr. Simon Raybould. I'd like to tell you a little bit about how I got here. Well, 15 years ago, I first started to..." And they start talking about themselves, and they start talking about why they know what they're talking about. The problem with that is that by the time they get round to the gift bit to give the audience has lost the will to live. To be fair, they've often lost the will for the speaker to live as well, which is pretty vicious. But the gift, the thing that you're trying to give the audience, that is the first thing that you should have when you're designing a presentation always. And I'm very carefully and consciously using the word design the presentation rather than write the presentation. Because as soon as you start to write something, different parts of your brain fire up and you start to think in a different way. And you find people writing presentations that use the word commence. Well, for goodness sake, when was the last time anybody used the word commence in conversation? We say begin or start. So you design the presentation and you develop it orally rather than write the flipping thing down. But you're right, the gift is the starting point. Always the gift is the starting point.
I really like that. I'd like to ask you about yourself as well. When you became a speaker, or even now, do you do anything to continue your professional journey? So do you invest in yourself in your speaking now? Do you still ask for feedback, or do you find that that you're now an experienced, accomplished person, you don't need to anymore?
Trust me, I don't need to ask for feedback. There are a lot of people more than happy to volunteer that feedback. The hard part is figuring out how many of them I should listen to. There's always somebody who thinks they know better. Of course there is. So yes, we do. I have a policy of, no matter how busy I am, I will never perform or train or whatever for more than 3 days a week. And then there's another day which is given over to marketing and admin, or more accurately in my case, given over to avoiding marketing and admin because I really hate them. And then the 5th day of the week is given over to personal development. And that can be research, it could be practice, it could be trying out new material and all of that kind of jazz. But I'm incredibly lucky because I belong to the Professional Speaking Association. I know the PSA, it has an option for you to do what's called a showcase. Now, a showcase is when you can, if you're a new speaker, you can start out and get some professional feedback. Or in my case, I can go to a PSA and go, guys, you know me, you know I'm good at what I do, but can I try out some new material? And you get feedback from experts before it even ever thinks about going to an audience. So you get that feedback all the time. The short answer to your question is yes, of course.
So that sounds great. It also sounds scary to actually be a professional and then go out and say to people, hey, what do you think? You know, who are also professionals. And on that note, I would like to know, what is the difference between the PSA and Toastmasters?
About £200 a year.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Toastmasters is an international organisation of amateurs. Now, that I say amateur in the sense that they do it for fun. That doesn't mean that they're rubbish. It just means they're doing it for fun. The PSA is for people who are professional speakers. The difference in quality between the two is not as clear-cut as the PSA would like it to be, perhaps, because there are some staggeringly talented amateurs and there are some flipping awful professionals. But by and large, the difference is that Toastmasters is designed for and run by and give you feedback from amateurs.
Okay, so I see that there's two very different focuses there, but actually, if you're starting out, I guess being part of both is probably useful in the first instance.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that Toastmasters does is give you a lot of stage time, whereas the PSA tends to concentrate on how to develop yourself as a speaker, in the speaking business.
Okay. So actually, in that instance, I think Toastmasters first and then PSA. I'm just interested. We're all looking at so many personal development things that we might do or that we want to consider new careers when we finish our MBAs. So it's really interesting to hear what you're saying because...
Do both. Try both. And it's also worth pointing out that every Toastmasters is different. So if you go to one Toastmaster and you don't like it, there's no reason why you couldn't go to another one and see if that one suits you a little bit more. The PSA is slightly more, I'd like to say is more consistent. I'm not sure I can say it with a straight face. The PSA is supposed to be more consistent.
I think it's really important actually to have these accredited bodies and professional groups behind you because it does signal to other people that you're really serious about what you do. I'm part of the Institute of CIPR, the Chartered Institute of PR Professionals or Chartered Marketing Institute, all these different things. And actually, it's great to show people that you take the time to invest in yourself, but also the learning you get and the events.
Yeah, absolutely. But don't forget, you can still be absolutely brilliant and not be a member of these organisations.
Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah, so what it does is it signals, I find it useful because it signals my professionalism, it signals my intent. What it doesn't do necessarily is signal my competence.
That's true. So I think what you're saying there is you can be accredited up to the hills, but actually sometimes the substance and the depth might not quite be there.
That's right.
Brilliant. Yeah.
So some of the best professional speakers I've seen in the world have got content that makes me want to scream and go, no! I'm about to freak out the sound engineer at this point by going, no, that's wrong! It's scientifically tosh! But they're great at delivering it.
It's true, though. And I love that. And I love your energy. That's really infectious, actually. It's great to hear how opinionated you are on chatting, speaking.
I don't do opinion. Oh, that's not true. I do opinion. Of course I do opinion. Everyone does opinion. When it comes to being a speaker, I like to think that I do opinion far less. And what I do is based upon a lot of research. Cut me through and I'm a research scientist. In the way, if you cut through rock, it says Blackpool. If you cut me through, it says research scientist. So everything I do is based upon pretty damned hardcore research.
Excellent. I like that. Thank you. I would like to ask about what you can do when you have been able to speak and then you lose your confidence. So how can someone work on their getting through that?
Oh, okay. So you've just hit a big one for me because I think you know I spent some time as a elective hysterical mute and I couldn't speak at all. I would start sentences and get maybe a syllable into the sentence and then just, for various psychological reasons, not be able to get through to the end. That's an extreme case. I guess the situation you're talking about is a more normal case where people lose their confidence stuff. There are a whole bunch of things you can do. And my personal favourite, and gosh, there are so many, I don't know where to start, but my personal favourite is one I call Be More Batman. And it is simply to ask yourself, yeah, you're right, I don't know what to do. I haven't a clue what to do. But if I did know what to do, what would it be? Or I don't know what to do, but who do I know who would know what to do? To which the answer is always Batman would always know what to do. He may not get it right, but at least he would do something. So there's this idea where you create a persona, if you like, and you step into that persona, literally as well as metaphorically. You see the persona and you step into that persona, and then you act as if you were that person. So when I was agoraphobic and couldn't leave the house, was a hysterical mute, I used to be able to leave the house at first. I used to be able to leave the house only by going, right then, I can't leave the house, but pretend Simon can leave the house. What does pretend Simon look like? And I would visualize him. I would see him pretending he was a hologram and step into the space where that hologram was, change my posture, change the way I stood, and went, okay, pretend Simon is going to open the door. Pretend Simon is going to walk to the end of the drive and touch the gate. And then pretend Simon is going to come back into the house, and real Simon is going to have a cup of tea. But that distancing yourself from the consequences, distancing yourself from the real person, means that if it goes wrong, it's not you that's getting hurt. It is your persona. It is pretend Simon. It's kind of a psychological armour. Other tools you can do, there's one called anchoring, or there's one I particularly like called peripheral vision, which is just become aware of what's in the corner of your eyes. Because when we are frightened of something, such as facing an audience, we obsess about the thing that we're looking at. So I'm sitting across the table facing you, and you're not frightening in the least, but let's pretend that you are. Okay, yeah, that was frightening. Let's not do that again. I'm looking at you. You're not frightening, but let's pretend that you are. What happens is that my brain cuts down my awareness of everything else, and that's a good evolutionary thing to do because it means I get more information about the one thing that's scaring me. But from a speaker's point of view, what it means is everything that I am looking at frightens me because I'm ignoring everything else. So there's a technique where you just become consciously aware of your peripheral vision. So I'm now looking at you, I become consciously aware of my peripheral vision. If you are the scary thing, over there's a window, that's not scary. There's a pop shield, that's not scary. There's a couple of computers, that's not scary. There's a glass of water, that's not scary. There's a microphone, okay, that is scary. But you kind of get the gist. The ceiling tiles, the lights, the baffling, the recording equipment, they're not scary. So what you do is you go from, here is a scary thing in this room, to becoming aware of everything in the room and going, here is a room with lots of things in it. Oh yeah, one of them is scary. So you're diluting the scariness. There are lots more, but probably we've only got an hour's time. So let's stop there.
Well, I like that. And actually, I'm a big fan of the anchoring one. I use that a lot. And I believe if I'm using the right jargon with the word anchoring, am I right in thinking that it's around your senses? So what can you see? What can you touch? What can you smell? That sort of thing. What can you feel? Okay,
there are a number of techniques, but yes, that's one of them. So the idea with anchoring is that at a point when you're feeling cool, calm and collected, you become consciously aware of whatever the hell is going on around you. really, really consciously aware of whatever is going on around you. And you become particularly conscious of something you do or something you touch or whatever. And you do that every day whenever that good thing happens to you. So for me, it's when I walked home and saw my front door. All right? I turned the corner, I saw my front door, and I just went, ah. And at that point, I took a real conscious look around, went, how am I feeling? Where are my feet? What am I touching? Where are the birds? What's the weather? And then I touched the inside of my wedding ring. Now, that doesn't matter but for everybody else, but that's what matters to me. I touched the inside of my wedding ring. So what I did was subconsciously set up an association in my head between feeling good and all of those things that I have just noticed, all the senses that you were talking about, and touching my wedding ring. So now when I go into a situation where I'm absolutely terrified, I can touch my wedding ring and it subconsciously reminds me of the birds, the trees, seeing my front door, and all of those things that I just measured and noticed on the good days.
Okay, I like that. That's a really good explanation of it as well. And I think it's really important when we do get stuck. Here's another one that I find comes up for me sometimes, and I'm sure many of the people you coach or work with may have similar things. I often get asked to speak to early career research associates or entrepreneurs or students actually in colleges who maybe are lacking passion or not really sure where to start with things. And I love it. One of the things that sometimes scares me is when you look out at the audience and the audience is just blank. And last year I spoke to some people and I had props and all sorts of things. And I knew they were research associates. So I thought, oh gosh, they're going to think I'm too quirky, too kooky. And there was one woman who I looked out at her face and she just looked so angry or aggressive or just...
Got the death face. The
death
mask. Yeah,
exactly. And I was just like, whoa, what is her problem? And actually, the interesting thing was when I finished the presentation, there were no questions, which I kind of was... wow, I didn't even get any questions. I really messed that up. But I got so much feedback afterwards about passion and energy and a different perspective. And this particular woman actually was the first person to come up to me and say, that was amazing.
So many things to say there. The first is, don't judge how well your presentation is going by the audience in the room. Because if the audience in the room, as is statistically going to be the case with a whole bunch of research scientists, if the audience in the room is introverts, they won't give you the same level of feedback as you, as an extrovert, are expecting. So worst case scenario is that they're not giving you feedback. Inside your head, your little self-stage manager is going, oh my, you're bombing, you better do something. So you become more of an extrovert, and more of an extrovert, and more of an extrovert, and more of an extrovert. The problem is that if the audience is introverts, all that's doing is like hermit crabs, pushing them further and further and further into their shells, because what they want is space and distance. So just because they're sitting there and not responding doesn't mean they're not taking it in necessarily. There might not be, but you can't tell. It could just be that they're introverts. They could just be concentrating. But the really big thing I want to pick up is we talk about the 3 stages of impact for presentation. So stage 1 is how do you feel it went? Stage 2 is how does the audience feel it went? And those are both measured in the room. And that's where most presentation training stops. And that's a complete waste of time. Oh, I've just alienated every presentation trainer in the world. Tough luck. Because what really matters is stage 3, which is what happens to your audience's lives after they leave the room. Okay, so stage 1 is how you think it went. Stage 2 is how the audience think it went. Stage 3 is actually what do they do with that information in the end. And by definition, they can't do anything with it in the room. What matters is the 3rd stage behavior, and you won't get feedback about that until days, weeks, maybe even years after. So earlier this week, I got an email from somebody who I'd made a presentation to literally 4.5 years ago. And she got in touch to say, thank you, I've just applied that tool that I included in my presentation. And that's 4.5 years. I've gone back to the notes I took for that presentation, because we all do reflective feedback on your presentations, right? Right? Yeah, of course we do. So I've gone back to my notes, and I've actually found the gig that I did, and I thought that presentation absolutely bombed. There's a note that says, call Corinne. Corinne's my wife. And if I have to phone Corin to go, it was awful, then something has gone very badly wrong. And yet I'm still getting positive feedback from it 4.5 years later. I can't say ignore your audience, but don't worry about your audience. Don't obsess about your audience. They are not the most important thing in the room. Your message is the most important thing in the room.
Absolutely. And I love what you said there about when you're an extrovert, you are getting bigger and your personality is getting bigger and bigger, because I've never thought about that. And actually, that is a really useful tool that I'm going to take away myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you're an extrovert and you're stressy, you become more extrovert because that's how you get your mental energy. I'm luckier in that regard because I'm a psychological introvert, so I pull back when I get nervous. I have to make a point of coming forward to my audience all the time when actually what I want to do is go hide behind the laptop.
It's so funny to think that even professional speakers get scared of speaking.
We have a mantra: the day you're not scared is the day after you should have quit. And that's because there are only two reasons for not being scared. The first is if you don't care, and the second is if you're a sociopath. And I'd like to think I'm not sociopathic, and I do care. Every time I go on stage, I really, really care because I've got a really important message, as you say, the gift, to give to people. It's a blessing. And if I screw this up, I've wasted everybody's time and somebody's money. Well, obviously, I've not wasted their money because I won't charge them if I screw it up, obviously. But I've wasted a lot of people's time. So there's a huge pressure on a professional speaker. They have to perform, they have to deliver all the time, every time. Otherwise, they're being rude to the people that are coming to see them. But for me, it's very much about concentrating on the message rather than the audience. It's the only way you can stay sane, to be honest.
I like that. Okay, so speaking of giving something to the audience, you've got something really exciting coming up. Can you tell us anything about it?
I can. I've just taken possession of the prototypes of my first physical product that is not a book. So I've got half a dozen books in the past, and I will have books again in the future. And this is the first one, my first physical product that's not a book, because I did a shed load of research into the process of designing presentations and why people keep forgetting what they're talking about during presentations. Now, it turns out that there is a process which works 95% of the time to get your presentation structure 95% of the way there. It won't get your presentations to the point of stand-up genius applause, but it will get them to being good enough, which is frankly what most of us need. We're not trying to change the world, we're just trying to report to the boss. So we've got the presentation design pack is that process put in a box for people to buy. So what I would like to offer, if it's okay with you, it comes in gold, silver and bronze levels with genius levels of unoriginality, gold, silver, bronze. If people go to presentationgenius.info/zest, there's a coupon code there. And at that point, they will be able to buy the silver pack for the price... No, start that again. The bronze pack for the price of the silver pack. Okay, so you'll get all the goodies for the price of half of the goodies.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That sounds excellent. And I love how you put zest on the end. That works very well for our listeners and for me because it's my favourite word.
Yeah, presentationgenius.info/zest.
Great. It would also be good to know all your different books, and we can list them on the website as well, because it's always nice to hear from people who are speakers but also authors. We have only had, I believe, one other author on the show, and he hasn't been released yet. So Rob Baker.
Right. So I've got several, and the last one was a bestseller, but I can't claim any credit for that. That was entirely down to the publishers, because they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew exactly how to sell it, and Hodder and Stoughton don't mess about. They know exactly. And I have to say, if anybody tells you that walking into WH Smith and seeing your book on the top of the bestsellers list is not cool, they're lying. It's one of the coolest things you will ever, ever, ever see in your life, to the point where you're running around WH Smith going, photographs, photographs, photographs.
I'm sure. And actually, what did you do to celebrate that day?
I was in Sarajevo at the time, so I had a cocktail.
Brilliant. I like that. Good way to have some fun. And
when I say a cocktail, I think I mean a cocktail every half hour for a considerable period of time.
It's a good reason to celebrate.
It's a good reason.
Absolutely. So we're actually run out of time now. So I can't believe it's whizzed by so quickly, and it's so nice to chat to you. And I hope that people listening have got some great tips there, because I know I have. So I'd like to ask you my favorite question, as always. What is your number one word to nurture your zest?
This is easy. This is so easy. The word for me, it's just so corny. The word for me is wife, because my wife is a saint. She is beyond wise. She is beyond long-suffering. She is beyond astonishing. And if I ever find myself when I've got that point where I just can't do it anymore, I just have to look at her and just, yeah.
Well, I think that is awesome, and I think it's super romantic. So shout out to Corinne.
Corinne, yeah. Shout
out to Corinne, because you sound fabulous. And actually, I have to say, Simon did a shout out at the MBA talk as well, which is brilliant. I think it's really nice to remember as well that we're professionals, all of us, but we're all humans, and we have people that matter. And it's so nice to hear how much you adore your family. It's really special.
My family is strong. My family is special. My family is scattered across the world at the moment, but they are special.
Brilliant. Well, it's so lovely to hear about. Thank you so much for sharing that and everything else with us today, and for coming on the show.
Absolutely, my pleasure, and thank you so very, very much.
You've been listening to Nurture Your Zest. You can find us online on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn at Nurture Your Zest. If you've liked today, please subscribe. You can also leave us a review if you're feeling extra kind. Today's podcast has been made available through the kind sponsorship of TL Multimedia and That Branding Company. We look forward to catching up with you again soon as you learn to nurture your zest.